story. Now hear those who were involved in making it come to life. Join us as we go behind the door.
Good evening, roomies, and welcome back to another episode of Behind the Door with the Grey Rooms podcast. I am your host, Brooks Bigley, and with me tonight is Ashley B. Davis, the author of Season 4, Episode 6, entitled Feud. How are you this evening, Ashley?
I am doing well. How are you?
I am doing okay. I was going to go on a road trip, but now I kind of don't think that I want to because I'm not sure I trust the person with me. So thanks for that, by the way.
As long as you haven't done anything to, engender a sense of revenge.
Well, yeah, and oh my goodness, I can't wait to talk about the story because there's revenge and there's like this weird, we used to be buddies, there's some kind of broken friendship thing going on, so this is going to be a lot of fun. Where are you located at?
I'm in Southern California, Bakersfield.
In Bakersfield. So do you have, like, the setting for your story, is it kind of like that around where you're at or on the outskirts of where you're at?
We are very desert-like here. I have driven through, like, the Mojave Desert often, so I'm pretty acquainted with that. We get rain, like, twice a year, maybe, so it's maybe not desert-ish, but I am aware of, that climate. I really like that climate. I was fascinated with it the few times that we've driven through it, and it's something that I know, so I think I stick to that.
Yeah, it's really cool in the story as a setting because, I mean, your plot of what happened with the characters didn't depend per se, I guess, on that setting. I mean, Tim could have taken Lee and buried him in a city somewhere, That wasn't the main focal point, but it was beautiful to have that crafted around the story because it gave such a rich environment, I think, for Jason to play with. And just the visuals that I got of these characters, I mean, bam, slam, just you dumped us right into the story in the beginning. And we're in this car with Tim driving, and he's kind of thinking back on, like, well, how the hell did I get here? What's going on? So you got us up to speed, but the visuals of that open road and, like, finding the mirage and, like, it all served very, very, very well for this story.
Thank you so much.
I loved it. We have this great, like I said, this great story of, like, it's a anti-buddy story. Mm-hmm. and you have these shades of, like, revenge, and he's getting revenge, but why? But that doesn't matter. And then what the hell's going on with this guy who's about to get killed, and he's cool as a goddamn cucumber about it all.
He so is, and Brandon did amazing with that. I couldn't even believe how well he captured that. I think that when I was writing it, I wanted to write this really seductive antagonist, and the whole he's cool and collected. He's a little bit resigned at times, but he's also impervious to whatever's going to happen. He doesn't care. And I tried to put that in the story, and I don't think it came across as well as Brandon executed it. Like, he did so amazing.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I would not have batted an eye if he was like, oh, man, you don't want to do this. You just want to take me back.
Right.
We're fine. We're friends. You could hear Tim be like, oh, actually, you're right. Let's turn around. And so, yeah, he was super seductive. He was so, I mean, to be honest here, like, we're jumping the gun. We'll talk about it all, but I almost was, like, waiting for some kind of, like...
argument?
So I'll just show you my cards now. I was thinking that there was going to be a twist, by the end, that maybe somehow Lee was already dead and Tim was just like talking to the body and like, fuck, what is going on here? And so that's how he was dealing with it all, was talking to the body. So that's why Lee's like, you're looking kind of, you're not sweating, man. You should break open some of those palms and drink that. Or it's at every point, he's not even critiquing. He's
goading him the entire time. And you're like, what are you doing, man?
Very subtle. Yeah. It's very subtle. And so I kept thinking, like, that's got to be the twist, but... And it didn't mean that the story wasn't, good because it didn't hit what I thought would happen. That's the beauty of how you wrote it. I thought it was a very satisfying ending because, he mentions, Tim mentions as he dies, like, I had a feeling that Lee was somehow behind all of this. And like, yeah, fuck yeah, you got killed by a snake. Like, clearly Lee was up to something. So I'm all over the place here right now. So let's go back to the beginning. And you hadn't written this story. And I want to write a horror story. Did you write this for us, or did you already have the ideas going? How did that precipitate?
I this was actually the very first story I ever tried to write. So I have been writing for a long time, but I had never written any short work. And I think it was back in like 2012, I started following a female horror author, and she just blew my mind with, how professional she was and how she was just like blazing this trail for women in the horror genre. And it's Annie Nugebauer.
Okay.
She's Bram Stoker nominated author, and her stories are amazing. Her poetry is amazing. And so I was just kind of thinking of this more as like an exercise to try to write a short story. And I was like, oh, and I can write a horror story. I love horror. Why have I never thought of this? Horror movies are my favorite. I grew up like telling stories to my siblings and our friends. This is an old story. It's been through so many changes, and only on the most recent change where I finally felt a click. Like, okay, this is good. Somebody's going to accept this now. And I sent it out there just on a whim to you guys. And I think I just recently heard on one of the Behind the Door episodes or something, maybe one of the frame narratives, that the characters always have to die at the end of the Grey Room stories. And every single horror story I've ever written now has that happening. And so when I was writing this, I was like going into it like, is this a cheap way to end the story by doing this? And it turns out that it was meant for you guys the entire time.
Yes. And also because of all the shades of again, I'm always like, it's fun to have giant monsters and stuff, and we do that. But when you made me very happy because you got the human, you got the human on human aspect here, and like the human is always the biggest monster. Like I just love that stuff, that kind of psychological horror. And I wouldn't say this was like a slow burn because you dumped us right into it, but like you're for sure like you're holding on, like what's going on, like why does he want to kill him, and like, oh shit, why is he being so cool about this? What is he going to do? Is he hiding a knife somewhere? Is he going to pull, like what? Lots of layers. Anxiety in a good way. Yes, because of the layers, you definitely cause multiple feelings to happen.
It's funny that you say that about, people had asked me like, well, what did he do when I was writing it? And I was kind of letting people read it at first. They were like, well, what did he do? And I'm like, no, it doesn't matter, because actually you mentioned earlier, like the setting isn't necessarily where it has to be, but I planned this story from the beginning that the setting would be part of Lee and be part of the antagonist. So, at the end, what happens to Tim, it's all like wrapped up. Lee and the setting, it's all one, because Lee kind of is a representation. It is on the surface like a buddy, gone bad story, but in revenge, but underneath it's a lot of just symbolic tropes, man versus nature. So yeah, like you said, man is the villain, but also nature is the villain.
Yeah, well, the unintended villain. Or it was used as a tool almost. Well, then, okay, let's get into that. If you can reveal, what was Lee doing? So we can piece together that when Tim went to Lee's, home, trailer, the trailer is the home. Come on. So he goes to his home, and he hears the hissing, and he didn't realize, what it was. But we can put together
What's
later.
What's going on there? Yeah.
Yeah, he had snakes, and then he has crowfab. Tell us what crowfab is.
Crowfab, anti-venom. I was just looking up just a popular name brand, anti-venom, what you use if you get bit by a poisonous snake, and that's what the main one was.
Right. So Lee's doing something with snakes, and we don't know
well
what.
Acquainted with snakes in some way or another.
Yes. And to me, that's why I was like, oh shit, at the end when Tim says, I had a feeling that somehow Lee was behind this, because in a direct way, Lee knew about snakes and did something with snakes, and it's not like he brought that snake with him and was like, haha,
and just planted it there, like here's a nice green rock.
Yeah, that would be a very elaborate subplot that you'd have to somehow reveal. So it was like a beautiful karmic end that Lee said, I'm gonna do it again right as he dies. But guess what? He did it again.
He did it again, and he will keep doing it again.
Yes. So how then? You wrote this story, you wanted this setting, but what ultimately made you think, all right, I'm going to have these two people, I'm going to leave this thing between them ambiguous, but we're already we're starting almost at the ending of the story. And that's such a fun way to drop the reader in. Like, you better start running now as I drop you in here because it's fast. Catch up quick.
God, and that's always the writing advice. Everybody says, you're starting too early. Nobody needs to see them waking up in the morning and, making all these decisions, looking at themselves in the mirror. And I didn't even realize I was doing that. I just kind of, with regards to this starting the story where it starts, I just wanted to jump into Tim just being a ball of stress because he's very much a part of myself. And I think a lot of people that, have control issues and try to fight against the natural way of things, try to control things. And he is so that as he's driving down this desert road with, nobody around but his old buddy / enemy in the back of his van.
Well, yeah, and you also even included a part, just again, like you have all these little subtle things. They're not even clues, they're just subtle parts, I think, that help support the story. You talked about how Tim went to go find Lee where Lee works and ultimately didn't find him, and he threw up, his gluten-free wrap.
Yeah, that's very important.
Yeah, so he's experiencing anxiety. Like maybe he was all puffed up, like, here I go, I'm going to do this now. And he shows up. He wasn't probably going to kill Lee at the workplace, but definitely going to confront him, and couldn't do it. Oh, that adrenaline dump goes away. Blah, he just threw up everywhere.
And he's like, you know what? I'm going to his house. Fuck it. I'm going to his house.
Yes,
I'm going to I may walk in and he may shoot me, but I can't take this anymore.
Right. So but see, that also lets us kind of sit in that anxiety, I think, with Tim, because we dropped into it. He's going there like, oh shit, he's throwing up. He's headed like we're experiencing what Tim is almost experiencing. So you really, cleverly crafted all of that together.
Thank you so much. That's so good to hear.
Yeah. How like did you conclude this then? Like, how did you then come up with? You knew someone had to die, and you killed both of them, but how did that all fit into place for you? Yeah,
apparently that's how I write horror stories. Is like I know from the beginning somebody's going to die, and that's how I end it. But when I get an idea, it's always characters before anything else, and I just knew that I wanted to write something with two, like, kind of a Western standoff. I honestly didn't even really, even though it was inspired by a Western or anti-Western book that I had read, Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy, I didn't think of the story as a Western. And so I think it's great that you guys, or I guess James Scherf put that music in there. It's very desert music. It was fantastic. And I was like, oh, this kind of is a Western. But yeah, I knew that I wanted to have these characters in the standoff. And I knew that I wanted them to be symbols of, man and his desire to control and, nature or the unfeeling universe, basically. And kind of, it came from there. Lee's charm came from there, and Tim's uptightness came from there.
Yeah, well, yeah, Lee seemed very rooted in nature, and it was just dropping nuggets of wisdom, like, these plants here, they last 1,000 years, and their roots are this big, and then, hey, man, you ain't sweating, you got to go over there and eat one of those things. Like, he was
and Tim's just fighting against it the whole way. No, I have bottled water in the van, it's going to be fine.
Beautiful duality between these two characters that instead of it being a single, you could have just had it being Tim narrating and it being about just Tim's perspective. But, then we get Lee's perspective, and they're not polar opposites of each other, but definitely, they're hugging different sides of the spectrum. Right. Because clearly they're both, thieves or bad guys, or someone did some shit and we don't need to know, and it doesn't matter. They're not two innocent guys and one's like, oh, you wronged me, I'm going to show you. Right. And so they're the same in that respect. But again, Lee is just so in touch with himself, it seems like, and he probably knew he was gonna die, maybe, but it's like, well, it's gonna happen. I was struck by how fucking awesome he was as a character.
He was. He just, like, from the beginning, his motto, his slogan is, a score wants to be settled. He knows it's coming. He knows nature, is cyclical, and karma, like you said earlier.
Yeah, exactly. He's like just following along with what happens. Whatever comes, and he's very here, very now. That speaks to me. That's very much how I try to personally, live my own life. And then you got Tim, who is just an anxious ball about everything.
To that, right?
Yeah, exactly. He's the antithesis. That part of his personality is the antithesis to Lee's calm demeanor. And so Tim is just like, and no shit, he fumbled in the. I mean, it was his fault. He fucking died at the end. He almost killed himself. Basically, is what happened.
Right.
He was trying to be so careful, and yet he was still being careless because.
Right. It just goes to show, no matter how much you plan.
Yes. Well. No, he planned very well. If Lee had done all this, guaranteed it would have gone off without a hitch. So
definitely,
it was the anxiety. To me, this is my opinion. The anxiety is also what I guess Tim was struggling with. Yeah, and then shit, man, he got his karmic comeuppance. So one thing too is just the story in itself, taking us on this journey of these two men and like. You're not, supposed to suppose a bunch of stuff between the two of them, but you don't necessarily need everything filled in. It just felt like a really good, I call them blockbuster stories. And I always say that because when I hear a particular story that hits me, like this story or like the other ones I call that, like the big action packed. To me, this was action packed. And when I say it's a blockbuster, it's because it would translate well to be an actual visual movie. Like you hit all the right, you checked all the marks right. Gave us really in-depth characters that we should give a shit about. Still very much a singular setting though, even though, went from the van to the burial site. But everything could have translated so well into just a movie. Like, I want to see this as a movie. You've got to pitch this as a script 5 years from now to a.
That is so satisfying to hear because I feel like I'm such a, and I'm not ashamed of it, but I feel like I'm a very character driven like novelist and, short story author that I don't really develop very like big action packed plots. It's always so internal. So that is fantastic. Thank you.
Well, the action was in just how they were responding to each other, how the story was unfolding. This very believable act of like, okay, given all of the things we know that bad shit happened and they're bad people, this is how they deal with it. Then this is just a really well told story about murder gone wrong and just how. Man, anything at any point can go wrong, and I love having that slammed, in my face as a horror lover, versus just like, oh, there's a monster, the monster's gonna get us. Oh,
right, like you being like Lee, very cool and trying to go with the flow, and then as you're doing these things, oh, here's a storm coming. Oh, here's this hawk that's having its dinner next to you.
Yeah, there were so many.
There's a snake
tests.
biting me.
You just had, and then throw this in, and then throw that in. It was like a simulation, and you were just trying to test out Tim's resolve.
Just ruin his life.
Yeah, and he made it pretty far through the levels. He almost beat the boss.
Admirable, right?
Very much so. Yeah. So you said this was. I'm sorry, let's back up about like writing in general. You said this was like your first major story that you wrote, or just a first story to a podcast?
This is just my first attempt that I had ever made at writing a short story. I've been writing like novel length works since I was, a teenager in high school. Horrible, horrible novels that will never see the light of day. And, I'm probably working on like my 8th one right now, but this was my very first short story attempt. And it has been through so many cycles and drafts. And sometimes I think that I'm realizing now that as you redraft and rework these things, you send it out, you get a decline, and you just kind of keep going. There's a point where you fix something was off, and it the whole time you're submitting it. And once you fix that thing, it clicks. And whenever I feel that click, then I always kind of know in advance, like, okay, it's good now, it's ready.
Now, how often are you writing? Like, what kinds of things are you writing?
I am writing, right now I'm brainstorming a couple of novels. One I stalled on, I'm brainstorming another one I write across a number of genres. The one I'm working on right now, I'm trying to get back into my horror roots. So it's kind of like a, possession versus insanity situation. And then I haven't written a short story in a long time, so I was really happy to hear that the Grey Rooms had decided to, produce this. So,
what did you think of, like, when you first heard the story? Like, what was your take on you had mentioned that you loved how Brandon did, like, to you, even better justice of your character than what you wrote. Mm-hmm. So, like, what was your overall experience? Pressing play and then hearing that music opening and then Alistair Mackey coming in with the story. What did it do to you?
Well, first we have to go to when the preview was put up, and I lost my mind. I'm not going to lie. And then when I sat down and I listened to the whole story, and it was great seeing Alistair transfer, from his Todd character to Tim. That was phenomenal. And hearing the music, it just brought it to life. I think that's every author's dream, to like hear it brought to life, like that. They did such a phenomenal job. The music just tied in so well. I'm blown away by what you guys have done.
Yay, another satisfied customer. That's excellent. Do you listen to a lot of podcasts?
I don't actually. When I got word from Cassie last year, I think it was like middle of last year, that you guys had decided to produce this in this season, I started at the beginning, because I can't just jump into that frame narrative you guys have around all the stories without like going to the beginning, right? So I went to the first episode, which was a doozy. I was listening to that first episode. It was about the skydiver at the playground with my kids. They're playing, and I'm listening to this horror podcast. And it was terrifying. It was very startling. Something about, I feel like if you read a lot of these stories, like, and that's the thing about horror, like it has to touch very certain buttons to make you feel like terror. You can appreciate horror as a genre, but it has to do things a certain way that, movies, it's so much easier for them. And I think that the magic of audio productions of horror stories is just like hearing all these sounds brought to life. I remember when I was writing it, I was trying to set the mood with, the storm and the plants, the dry plants that are rattling all around you. And I didn't even think about things like what it would sound like when Tim starts choking Lee, or the gunshot, that kills Lee, or, just Lee laughing and whistling. It was so magical. I loved it so much.
Yeah, I would encourage you, if you, not just for us, but for any, podcast that accepts short stories of any genre, really, I would encourage you specifically to try your hand at writing something else more. And what you just said, that like, you were conscious of setting it this way and doing this, and you didn't even think about the gunshot
things. Yeah,
because when you're moving forward, let's say you had extensive experience with podcasting, right? Like it had been written, 50 stories already for other podcasts, and then you wrote this for us. Maybe when you got to that gunshot part, you would have been like, oh, I know it's going to sound like this, and then you could have written it in a way around that to play with that. There's ways that writers know, I can't see this, so I have to write a very specific way.
Yeah, I definitely noticed that in listening to some of the older episodes, and it sounded like there were a few authors who had, been around the block a couple times with podcast productions, and you could tell in their stories how, they took advantage of that and played with that.
Yeah, just the wording in certain scenes that conveys the same, and I talked about this in the very last Behind the Door with Ian A. Bain for his invasive story, that same scene can play out differently if you're just narrating, I stood up and I did this thing and then I went and did that thing, versus saying, I notice I have to do a thing, and then you hear the getting up and then the thing and then the doing of the thing, right?
Right. You don't need all those action cues anymore, because the audio kind of lifts it up. And that was an interesting thing too, is when I got the acceptance, I think it was from Cassie, and she was saying, if you want to go ahead and change it, or no, it was when I was first looking at the call for submissions, and it said change it to audio format. I was like, I have no idea how to do that. They say I don't have to, so I'm just going to let it fly and see what happens. And I only just realized in like my third or fourth or fifth listening to the story that I had written it in third person perspective, and of course it was changed to first person to make more sense on audio, and it was just so seamless and it translated so well. And yeah, it was just, I was blown away.
And it was great because it gave Tim and Lee very unique rooms per person to breathe their character to life, versus it being one guy talking about his viewpoint or another guy talking about his viewpoint. It just made more sense to be an I and a he. Yeah, exactly. All right, so, sorry, I said I and he, but it still was I and I, because then it does switch over and you get to hear
Lee for just a minute.
Yes,
just a little
yes,
teaser.
Exactly. Yes. So yeah, that opens it up. I think especially it was crucial because of the uniqueness of how you get us started, and we know that there's this thing brewing between them that has a deeper meaning that's leading somewhere. To translate it that way was really good. Your theme to me, and it's my opinion, but like, the horror that I got out of it was that anxiety of trying to get what was Tim doing? What was he so? He was just so mad about something. Like, we know he was getting revenge. He was getting something back on Lee, but man, Lee was cool. What did Lee do wrong? So the anxiety kept me going, and it wasn't. I wasn't afraid of anything. There was nothing to be afraid of, but it's still horror because it's so. It was frying my brain with the anxiety of like what was
under the
happen.
Skin. Yeah, it just kind of like digs.
You. Yes, so that's so great that you could include these elements. You said something earlier in this chat that you kind of identified with Tim a little bit because of the anxiety side.
Oh yeah.
So that was like you getting. I had a sense that like you. I haven't. Today is the first time I talked to you, but reading your story, hearing the podcast episode, I got the sense that you were getting something off of you. That you, not that you had experienced driving through a desert and had to kill somebody.
I mean, you don't know that.
I was just trying to be nice. I was just trying to save you, because this is all going to be kept on the internet. So whatever you want to admit to is fine. Exactly. Right. You're canon to humanity now. But yeah, so I just figured that like you were using sometimes authors just can straight write anything. Like, they write about aliens attacking. They have no personal experience with that. None of us do. Hasn't happened yet. But they can write about an angry parent or a scary backyard, because that's something that they personally might have gone through. So it just bleeds through a little bit, that personalness. You added that bit. So I was like, oh, this author understands a bit about anxiety, because I'm getting it all over the place.
Tense.
Yes, that's true horror. Oh God.
Yeah, I think that's just so important. And some people, you're right. Some people can just fly off the handle, write anything. I have my major critique partner does that, and I think it depends on a lot of things. But because I'm a character driven author, I don't get ideas for stories. I get ideas for characters, and then the story comes from that. And so you have to find something. You don't want a bunch of characters that are yourself. I mean, I'm not even half as cool as Lee, but you want to have some aspect, of yourself that you can pull from, or some experience, that you can touch on to make people feel it. Like, I think I was just listening to today the Nolan story from last season, and your interview with the author and how she's a mom, and the things that she was saying that she thought about when she was writing the story, that I don't think you can achieve those things, with as much veracity as you could if you weren't a mom that could imagine that situation.
Yes, that's what I'm getting at by like that personal portion that you're adding to the story. It's just that you are able to use the lens of horror to explore that idea and theme a little bit better, because you also have an understanding of what that's about. So yeah, that's a perfect example that you just gave, that maybe someone that's never had a child, or even like an older man, if he had written that story, it just wouldn't have the same impact. It's just not. It's not coming from the well-known lens the way it did with the original author. So, yeah, you hit that on the knob. So that's what I got the sense of that the story was like, oh, this author is giving us a slight portion of themselves. Not in the story, not that you were Lee, not that you were Tim, but the structure, the understanding of the themes,
right.
I thought were familiar with the author, which is you. So I'm glad you confirmed that. Yay! Yeah,
I do confirm it.
Okay, cool. Moving forward, like with your writings, do you intend to do anything differently after this experience of writing this story, or hearing it turned into a podcast, or are you pretty solid with like how you write and what you do?
You know, I mean, after hearing this, I'm so in love with the way that this was done. I think I do want to kind of explore this a little bit more. I have another story that I've kind of it's been out on submission for a while, and it seems like it would lend itself really well to hearing it, to hearing all those sounds, because again, I was thinking about those things in the setting. And I think that I would love to hear that. So that might be something I kind of change gears on. And instead of, submitting it to, print journals the old fashioned way, maybe look into something like this.
I mean, do both. Don't limit yourself. It's
right.
Not
Yeah.
either or.
Maybe do both. Yeah. Open up my doors. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I feel like, given that you're clearly understanding now how, impactful words can be through this podcast medium.
Right.
And so you're a fantastic writer. So I think that would bode well for you to then like kind of hone a little bit of that writing into the, like, here, I wrote this for a podcast, but I wrote this as a novella, or I wrote this for a publication. Mm-hmm. That just bodes very well for you as a writer, getting those words out of you. Right. Yeah. And knowing what they would be best suited for and kind of creating them or modifying them to fit in those areas. Yeah, you could do that too. You've got current stories and whatnot that you think would make for a great podcast. Exactly, because if you just wrote yourself a novel, or excuse me, a story that becomes a novel or becomes a novella, that can still be turned into a podcast. It's just, again, it's a matter of how to reword certain things. So yeah, right. You got something ahead for you. I know. My wheels are turning. Thanks a lot. Yay! Is there anything, as we draw closer here to the end of our interview? Is there anywhere that you can send people to find things that you work on, like on the internet, or can you mention anything that you have worked on that's public? Yeah, I have my first ever published short story, The Wake, is on, you can go to my blog, ashleybdavis.wordpress.com, and I have a page with my published work. So there's some poetry on there. And then my first published short story on like a major venue is on there. And then I recently had a poem published, and then before that I had another one that I got to actually record it on audio, and I just love the way that it came out. That one's through Liquid Imagination. You can find all of that on my webpage. Okay. Excellent. Nice. Well, I'm really hoping that I start to hear, Ashley B. Davis wrote this story for this podcast. I mean, there's a handful of podcasts, not just horror podcasts, but fantasy, sci-fi. Just there's one that I love talking about. Graham has been on it many times. I'm not sure if currently, because I haven't listened in a while, but I know in the past when I was listening for you, it's called The Truth Podcast, and they write just very believable, speculative stories about just humans going through shit. And it's not that anyone has to die. It's not anything it's not horror. It's just alternative stories that just make you feel like you were turned into a fly and you landed on the wall in this room and you get to experience these people going through something. And that's nice. It's a cool way to hear stories. It kind of reminds me of like the Twilight Zone, those old episodes, and just kind of seeing those multiverse scenarios. Yes, just taking regular situations and stuff and just putting a weird bend to it that's not too out of this world or serious. Exactly. Yeah. I will check that out. Thank you. Yeah. Your story was so fun to hear. I think simply, to me especially, that sounds weird, simply especially, your story was awesome to hear for me because of the character, the interaction between them. And so I think you know how to, because you wrote about a human against a human, but you also wrote about a human with a human, and that's important. Because if you don't understand humans, you can just be like, and then he stabbed her, and then she killed him, and then they did this, and then that would be and then someone screamed, and it would just be over and cheap, and yeah, but why did they do it, and what was his favorite thing, and why did she look at him that way? That's what you were really good at filling in. Thank you. So, that was awesome. Well, it was great of you for joining us tonight, Ashley. Thank you so much for having me. Oh, sure, yeah. This was fun. You were such a fun person to talk to.
Thank you.
I appreciate you taking the time to sit and chat, and I thank you for sharing your world here with us in the Grey Rooms.
Of course. Thank you so much, Brooks.
Yeah, and as usual, the biggest thank you goes out to our fans and followers who listen daily and spread the good word of Bob. May you languish, lament, and loathe, but always with love. Hashtag stay gray. Take care and enjoy your evening, Ashley.
Thank you, you too.
And good night, folks. Bye.
Join us each week after every episode for another edition